So I'm pretty excited because we're coming up to the holidays and my work has announced that there is a big Christmas party this year. It's the first time that they've done a big like holiday party in the time I've been here. The only other one that they ever tried to do was outdoors in December, which was actually pretty fun. They put some really good thought into it and it was very creative and cute, but it was cold. Like, it's Canada. It is cold in December, and so it was a little bit miserable. This year they have rented out a big space and they're going to do a Christmas party, and it has been announced that it is a primarily formal event. They're sort of encouraging everyone to take the opportunity to dress up, wear something fun for the holidays, and I'm super excited about that. I've had this thing ever since I was a kid where I just sort of like, it sounds weird to say dreamed, but I just always hoped that one day when I was older I'd be working at a job where I'd have the opportunity to wear a fancy holiday dress to a Christmas party. And now I do. And so I really don't want to waste that opportunity, and I kind of want a dress that's sort of exactly what I want, which is, I've been dreaming of a velvet holiday dress for many years, and so I'm taking the opportunity. Normally velvet is, to get like nice velvet, is really expensive, and I wouldn't normally have gone for it. However, I got really lucky that the fabric land near where I live actually has a 50% off all like velvet, sequin, fancy holiday fabric kind of thing going on. And so this red velvet that I've had my eye on for ages, that's normally $54 a meter, which is a lot, was on sale for like $25 a meter. I think it was 25, maybe 27, which is still expensive. Do not get me wrong. I had to buy 3 meters to do this dress based on what I read online. It's not cheap, but the way I saw it is likely I'm going to be able to make this dress exactly as I want it to be, fitting me perfectly. Even buying that velvet, I'm likely making that for way cheaper than I would be able to buy a dress that meets the same criteria, if I could even find one. So I bought this beautiful red velvet. I'm very excited about it. I'm kind of terrified to cut into it. I'm going to be doing a lot of research on working with velvet before I do too much. But I am pretty excited about it. And then I kind of wanted the dress to have a nice like underskirt layer or like lining kind of thing, just to give the skirt a little bit more volume. And so for that piece, I got this sort of like see-through, I don't know what this is. I don't know if this is chiffon. I don't think it's chiffon. I actually don't know what this material is called, but it's this really pretty red color that I think is going to go really nice. And I don't know if you can see it on camera, but it has a bit of a shimmer to it. So for both of these materials, the red velvet and the underlayer fabric, as well as some thread that I had to buy, I think everything came to like $122 Canadian. So again, not a cheap project. This project is costing money, and I know that, but I don't think I would be able to buy this dress for any cheaper than that, where it would be good quality, last me many years, and you know, whatever. So that's the materials I got. So there's a couple of things that I have to do to get started. Firstly, what am I doing for a pattern? And I don't have a pattern for this. I'm sure I could get one online, but what I decided to do was, for Halloween, I actually did like a Princess Diaries outfit, and I whipped my dress together last minute for that, and I actually made my own bodice pattern based on my measurements. And so I had created this dress that you can kind of see, and it zipped up in the back, and it went pretty well. Like, it fit. I was pretty happy with the fit, because again, it's all based off my measurements. This bodice isn't exactly the shape that I want for my holiday dress, but it's pretty close, so I decided that I would just adapt the pattern for that piece. and then just look up instructions on how to make a circle skirt for the skirt, because I want to do sort of a pleated circle skirt. But I really did not want to risk cutting into this velvet when I don't really know what I'm doing yet. So I made a whole prototype dress just to test it out. I have this huge thing of yellow fabric. And so I went ahead and did my whole plan on this yellow fabric. I tried out the circle skirt. So the tutorial that I looked at, it said to do half of your waist measurement divided by pi, and I missed that part. So I just did half of my waist measurement, and then I added a bit of size to it as well because I wanted to be able to pleat the skirt. I went a little bit overboard on the amount of size that I added. So I might have slightly goofed and like doubled, I think doubled the size of my waist measurement. That couple of inches that I added, that makes a big difference in a circle skirt. But it's fine, because the whole reason that I made it bigger than my waist was because I want to be able to play with if I can do some sort of pleating for the skirt. So I'm gonna try that now, and hopefully it's not too big. But the good thing is I still have that original line of my waist measurement, so if it is way too big, I can sort of work backwards to figure out what size to actually make the waist. It actually worked out pretty well, because once I put the pleats in, it was still perfectly fine to fit my waist. So I was a little freaked out because I thought I had put I basically did double the size I needed for my waist. But for doing big pleats, that actually works out pretty well. I pulled that whole dress together. It turned out pretty well, actually. I'm pretty happy with it. So I'll show that here. The biggest things I need to figure out is there's a little bit of tweaking to like the size of the skirt and how the back came together. I think my plan is to do a little bit of a zip at the skirt, and then ideally I'd like to do a lace-up back instead of a zipper, just to get that nice extra little bit of cinch. So now I'm gonna make those adjustments to the pattern pieces so that I can use those for this next phase. But I think we're basically at the point now of make the thing. Okay, so basically here I just wanted to show that this is sort of how the pattern evolved from the original Princess Diaries dress to the prototype for the holiday dress. So originally I had done this sort of like really shallow, almost trying to do a sweetheart neckline thing, not really, and it had sort of the V at the bottom, and it had a much higher back. For this new dress, because it's going to have straps, I went with a lower back. I wanted to have more of a square neckline, so I got rid of the dip there and got rid of the V, and then just created that bigger armhole with the little bit for the strap. But I didn't know at the time how long I need the strap to be, so now pretty much the only modification I'm going to make here is just actually adding what I need to create the pattern for that strap. And then it's going to be cutting into the scary fabric. I've been looking up some videos on how to work with velvet, and I feel 60% confident that I can do this. But the first thing I'm going to do is turn it all inside out when I fold it, so that A, I can actually chalk mark the lines, and B, I think it's going to be a lot easier to cut through the pile from the back. So we're gonna try. I'm a little bit nervous about what I was hearing in a lot of YouTube videos that I watched, was that you want to make sure you're cutting all of your pieces in the same direction, or otherwise, because velvet sort of has an up and a down direction, it'll look like two different colors of velvet. My biggest concern right now is that the nature of a circle skirt is that you have to cut it on a diagonal. So I don't totally know what's gonna happen when I go to do the connecting the bodice to the skirt, because it could look different because I have to cut the skirt on a diagonal and I have to cut the pieces straight. So, I mean, I could try to cut the pieces on the same diagonal, but it's just gonna waste a lot more fabric. So that part I have to figure out, but it's time. Okay, so I don't know if it's visible on camera, but I've got my circle skirt lines drawn, and then I'm laying the pattern piece out down there. I kind of hate that I'm having to lay the pattern pieces diagonal because I feel like it's not the most effective way to lay it down for like reusing as much of the fabric as possible, but it should prevent the issue of it looking like two different fabrics when it all comes together. One thing I am going to do though that I saw people talk about for actually sewing, but I think cutting can be kind of difficult as well, that like fabric shifts when you're cutting things. So I'm going to put some pins in, but I'm also going to do pins on a diagonal between each vertical pin, and it should hopefully hold it in place while I cut. Okay, so pattern pieces for the bodice are cut out. The skirt is up here, it's just like way too big to fit on camera. For the most part, it went pretty well. Pinning everything the way I did really helped the fabric not move. I'm a little bit disappointed because, of course, the one piece that's right smack dab in the center of the bodice is the only piece. Probably can't see it on camera, but maybe you can, maybe you can't, but it is the one piece that got crushed a bit, which is unfortunate. I tried really hard to avoid crushing any of the pile, and I was not successful, and of course it is right on the front, but this is the reality of, you know, I am not a experienced sewer, and so things happen, and that's fine. So I've got all my pieces for this. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew all of the velvet pieces as a thing, and then I'm going to like basically create the dress again with the lining fabric and then attach them. I don't know if that's the right plan, but it's the plan that I'm going with because in my head it makes the most sense, and I'm probably going to regret it later, but it's the plan we're moving forward with. I am now going to do something that I really don't want to do at all, but I think I should, is I know that it's easier to hem dresses and skirts when the fabric is like flat, like before it's all stitched together. So I'm probably gonna hem the velvet skirt right now, also to avoid it fraying in the process. But I know it's sort of like the alternative to all of the pinning that I was doing to cut the pieces out. You can do the same pinning to sew it, but the alternative is to do a basting stitch, and I really hate basting. But ultimately I think it's actually going to take, because it's such a big hem, it's going to take longer, I think, for me to pin it than to just baste it. Okay, so I did try the basting thing, and I think it is one of two or possibly both of these things. Either I have no idea what I'm doing basting, which is just objectively true, or it might also just be that what I was trying to do was not the right solution for trying to get the rolled hem to stay in place. I also just decided that doing the rolled hem with the velvet, I just don't know that I want to do that to myself because I think it's going to be a lot of work. So what I'm going to do instead is I've loaded up my machine with my red thread. I'm going to zigzag stitch all of the edges to try to prevent them from fraying, and then I'm just going to do a fold over hem, I think. Will I potentially regret that? Possibly, but I think that's what I'm going to do instead because I think I'm actually less likely to make mistakes if I do it that way. So we'll give it a go. Okay, I know the lighting is horrible. I just had to come on for a second to talk about that. As I said earlier, I am not a professional, obviously. I'm still relatively new to sewing. I've been sewing probably about 8 months, getting closer to a year now, like regularly. But it's, part of not being experienced is that in order to one day get to the point of being experienced, along the way you kind of have to make a lot of mistakes. And that sucks, but it kind of is just part of the process. And I'm sort of having to remind myself of that right now because I am trying so hard to do everything right. I've been trying to do research on how to work with velvet effectively and all of these things. And sometimes stuff still just goes wrong. Sometimes there's things that you can watch a bunch of YouTube videos and no one mentions it because it's just something you have to learn to recognize with time. One of those things being that I just started sewing the hem for the skirt, and I don't know if you're gonna be able to see this. The lighting's pretty awful, but basically it started gathering. I don't know if you can see that super well, but the hem, while I was putting it through, started gathering on me, and I had no idea why it was happening, and I started to panic, and I ended up Googling, why is my machine gathering fabric when I'm not trying to do that? And it turned out my thread tension was too tight, and I just needed to loosen it, and now it's fine. So there's about a 12 to 14 inch section of the back of the skirt where the hem is messed up. And yes, I could stitch rip it. I don't think I'm going to be honest. This is just one of those moments where I have to take it as a learning. But it sucks. It sucks messing things up when they're important to you. And I just wanted to mention it here because I think it's really easy to be really hard on yourself when you're new to something because you feel like you should just know better, but you don't. You have to make some of these mistakes to know better in the future. So velvet is hard. I knew that when I went into this. I'm sure this isn't going to be the only mistake I make, but trying to find the fun along the way. So I'm going to keep going and try to finish the rest of this hem. So I finished up the hem and it wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. So I moved on to pinning up the bodice so that I could get that stitched up. I kept using the pinning method from earlier with the straight pins and the diagonal pins. It definitely took longer to do, but I did really like this method because it gave me confidence that when I was putting it through the machine, my fabric wasn't slipping around all over the place. Next, I worked on pleating the skirt, so I measured the bottom of the bodice so that I would know what end size the waist needed to be for the skirt. And then I worked on creating these big pleats. I tried to alternate with some big pleats and some more narrow pleats, and definitely did have to trial and error this process. I did it over and over again until I got the right final size of the skirt that I wanted. There may be a better method for this that I didn't know, but in the end it turned out pretty well. I just had to, as I say, give it a little bit of trial and error. Once I was happy with the skirt, I did run a wide stitch over all of the pleats just to help keep it together when I went to do the next stages of pinning, so nothing slipped out of place. It's a couple days later and I actually have some energy right now, so it is time to tackle basically making the whole thing again with the lining fabric. So let's not talk about it too much, let's just get into it. I'm having a good old chuckle at myself right now for thinking that the velvet was going to be the hardest part of this project. This stuff that I decided that I was going to use, oh boy, wow. If cutting that stuff out is any indication of what it's going to be like to work this for the rest of the project, this is going to be fun. So here I'm just cutting out some little panels that I used to sew into the back of the dress where I was going to put the eyelets for the lace-up closure. I just put these in to help reinforce that part of the back of the dress for when the eyelets go in, so that the fabric didn't tear or get too worn down, because the other fabrics were a lot more delicate than these panels that I put in. So I've just finished pinning the lining and the outer layer right sides together, and I will admit I'm kind of terrified about this part, because this is where things start, like, this lining fabric, very, very slippery. Velvet, very difficult to work with. So I've put a ton of pins in, hoping everything will stay put, but I'm also just like, this is a really important part of like this project, making sure that this goes well. I'm actually in clothing other than a baggy shirt and sweatpants today, which is fun. I very much have what I call like my home uniform most of the time, which is baggy t-shirt or tank top, my big fluffy I Am Knuff hoodie, and sweatpants. And I've been wearing that for like 2 weeks. And I finally coaxed myself out to put on actual clothing today. So, you know, that's good. It's kind of interesting because the way I have the camera right now, I'm recording during the day, which is highly unusual for me. Usually I do all my craft working at night, but there's some natural light coming in the window over here, but for some reason the LED lights above me are making this look like a skylight, which is kind of cool. But yeah, just still plugging away on figuring out connecting this lining layer to the outside. If you are a professional seamstress, sewer, whatever, or you're much more experienced and you are cringing at the way I've been tackling this, I don't blame you. It's a really good learning opportunity for me, even if I am making mistakes. I am definitely learning from every mistake I've made. So now we just continue forth. I'm hopefully going to be putting the eyelets for the backing in soon and attaching the straps in the back. I didn't think it through quite as well as I should have, so I'm going to stitch rip a little bit of the stitching that I did in the back of the dress so that I can insert the straps into the seam and then stitch it shut again so that it's sort of like a seamless connection. But yeah, just working away at it, and I'm not gonna lie, I kind of really need this dress to be done soon because I think it is slowly consuming my entire life and it's all I think about. But I mean, projects like this are like that sometimes, so what can you do? So as much as you may not be able to tell in that clip, I was pretty stressed at this point. I had tried on the dress with the lining attached and it was not looking good. It was baggy, it was ill-fitting, it was very bizarre. But basically what I learned from this part of the process and what I came to realize was that I need to start building my seam allowance into my pattern pieces. This is obvious. I should have been doing this the whole time, but I wasn't. And so as you can see, it's super baggy in the chest and along the ribs here. But what's actually happening is the inner bodice was tighter than the outer bodice, which was creating this puckering effect because my body was not actually filling out the outer layer. And so at this point, what I realized I needed to do was make some adjustments. I trimmed down some of the hem inside where the lining skirt was to reduce some bulk at the waist. And then I went up to the bodice and I just seam ripped the seams at the chest because at this point I was like, screw it. I need to release the chest so that it looks better. And you know what? I never fixed this. This is how I wore the dress on the final day. And it is what it is, but it made a huge difference. As you can see, it's still not perfect, but it's looking way better. Okay, so I am disappointed right now. So I did make a bunch of tweaks to the dress. My hair is just going crazy. I did make a bunch of tweaks to the dress that I do think helped, at least from where it was earlier today. It definitely smoothed out a few things and it's not looking as bad as it was. And ultimately, it doesn't look that bad overall. I am definitely battling a lot of disappointment right now over how this has gone. I think a lot of the time on YouTube, when we see videos of people who do different creative projects, and you know, even when the title says like, I attempt to blah blah blah, 9 times out of 10, if the video's gone live, it turned out surprisingly well. But the reality is sometimes, like, a lot of the time projects don't go the way we expect them to, especially when you're a novice, which I am with sewing. And basically what I'm disappointed about is I feel like further back when I first finished the velvet portion of the dress, I had taken this photo and I really loved the way things were looking here. The biggest piece was there was no lining in it, and I think I felt like it should have a lining. And I wanted more fullness in the skirt, which could have easily been resolved by like an elastic waistband petticoat. Everything looked a lot smoother before. Now, what I will say, I always was gonna have to hem the neckline. And I think a lot of the issues that I'm currently having with the bodice still would have somewhat appeared when I hemmed the neckline, but it looked a lot smoother. It looked like it fit me better. I feel like the current dress, there's just a bulkiness to it that I'm not loving. I don't like how the straps have kind of come in a little bit, especially considering I'm not an expert and I'm still learning to sew, and you know, these things are not tutorials, they're just showcases of my process. I feel like it's really important to be more real about how things actually go. Like sometimes you put hours and hours into a project and money and things and it doesn't turn out awful. Like I still don't think this dress is awful. I think a lot of people are probably gonna think it's really cool. It's just not to my standard. And that's a hard thing to achieve. You know, my standards is it looking like it's straight out of a Pinterest photo, and my skills are not there yet, and that's okay. I've only been sewing like 8 months. So this was a huge undertaking, doing velvet. I definitely picked the wrong lining fabric. There are so many things I did wrong with this project and so many things I would do differently. I could make a whole separate video just talking about that. But who knows, maybe this will end up a couple years down the line, this will be the fuel for me to make one of those recreating this failed project I did a few years ago, and maybe I'll do it better in the future. But for the purpose of what I need this for, I think it's going to be fine. I just wanted to share that sometimes things don't go the way we want them to, and sometimes, you know, we regret certain decisions, and that's how I'm feeling right now. But ultimately, I think it was worth doing this project, and I think I've learned a lot. And it's just reminding me that there's still a long way to go, which I knew, but sometimes you kind of need to be humbled a little bit to remember that there's a lot more learning to do, which is a good thing. Okay, here we are, back where we started, and boy has this dress taken me on a journey. I thought about removing that last clip where I was clearly very bummed out about how things were going, and I decided to leave it in because ultimately that was what was real. Like at that point in time, I was really upset. I really felt like I kind of let myself down on this project and just didn't think it through enough, and yeah, it was kind of a bummer. And you know, as much as I'm feeling a lot better about it now, the time and separation that I've had since that last clip does not change the fact that the dress it has problems. Like, they're real. I mean, I think you would have heard me mention partway through the video that like I ripped out the seams on the inside of the chest. And I left them like that. So, you know, it's not just this dress didn't turn out the way I want. It's like I actually made genuine mistakes on this project. But I think where the separation, the time I've had away since that last clip has helped is I had the holiday party. So after that clip ended, I finished it up. I was like, you know what, I have to just get this done. And I closed up the back of the skirts. I closed up, you know, the whole back of the dress. I did some hand sewing bits just to tuck in some edges, and you know, the zipper, I did a little zipper at the skirt, trimmed out the inner layer of the skirt was longer in some places than the outer layer. So I trimmed that up and hemmed that again. And then it was about a week and a half between that, finishing the dress, and the party. And by the time that I brought the dress to work and got dressed up and put on my heels and my makeup and did my hair, I had no real hard feelings about the dress. Again, still wasn't perfect. Obviously, there was little things bouncing around in my head about like, oh, I wish I'd done this differently and this doesn't look good, and etc. But ultimately, I still felt magical in it. I still loved twirling around in it. I felt very Christmassy and holiday-y the way that I wanted to. And no one else knew. Like, actually, one of the best things that came out of this is while I was on the dance floor at the party, I had 2 random people come up to me from across the room and tell me how much they loved the dress and that they had to come across just to tell me that. And they asked to take a photo of me. So there's someone from my work somewhere who has a photo of me in my dress on their digital camera that I'll probably never see. But yeah, I think it is very real to feel the way I did about projects that go wrong like this. But I also think having that time away, that separation, and looking at your project again with fresh eyes is really important, because ultimately it didn't look that bad. I was really beating myself up over it. Did I learn a lot from this? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I could have done so many things differently. In hindsight, would not have done the 2 separate dresses, and like the lining dress and the outer dress, and combining them. I think I know what was going through my head at the time, but again, that's just one of those moments of I need to keep doing this so I can learn more, because, you know, I don't have classes and whatever. I occasionally look up tutorials, and I've worked with patterns, but like I've just been a crafty person my whole life. So sewing has been something that I'm just learning by trial and error. But the biggest takeaway that I learned from this, that I will scream from the rooftops to anyone else who is a newer sewer, you would think this is obvious, but apparently it wasn't to me. If you start making your own pattern pieces and you start playing around with creating your own patterns, for the love of God, take the time to build your seam allowance into your pattern pieces. I think that was one of the biggest detriments to me on this project. There was lots of other things that could have gone differently. I also think that I didn't totally understand how to build straps into a pattern properly, because the straps had got a little funky. But outside of that, building seam allowance into the pattern pieces, I think, would have changed a ton of how this dress turned out, because as I mentioned, I had these big holes on the inside of the dress at the chest, because as I started putting the dress together, I started having all this gaping at the front. I was like, what the heck is going on? Because it looked great before. And I discovered that the inner bodice, the lining bodice, had ended up being tighter than the outer. And so I was flush against the lining, but my body wasn't filling out the outer layer. And so that's why I had to seam rip the chest on the inside. And I think largely that comes down to that I have had this bad habit of making my pattern pieces based on the final size that the pieces should be, and then just eyeballing the seam allowance, which is just stupid, really, to put it frankly. And so that was a huge learning for me, and I think there are a few things like that came out of this project where I wish it had gone differently in many ways, but I'm also grateful for the things that I learned in the process, because I think it's going to help me create even better garments going forward. and I still had fun in my dress. I felt great in it. The lining, as I said, would never use that fabric again as a lining. I'm still learning the art of picking a lining fabric, and not only was that stuff a nightmare to work with, it was itchy, it was like, oh, would not do that again. But ultimately I had a really fun time wearing the dress. I felt very festive and pretty and twirly and, you know, all the good things about it. So yeah, if anything, I think this video is a testament to some of the mental battle that you can take yourself through when you care a lot about a project and it doesn't go the way you planned. But ultimately, I had a good time in it. I felt good, and I think it was a worthwhile project to do. So if you stuck around through the video, I really appreciate that. I hope that this was interesting to some degree. I'm very new to creating YouTube videos. This is the first one I'm posting. Outside of this, I've just done some YouTube shorts. So if you found it interesting, I'd love to know. If you have any comments about it, I'd love to hear them. And I hope to make more videos like this in the future. I've actually got a couple of fun projects coming up that I want to try to document. So yeah. Thanks for sticking around if you did, and as much as I know this video is going up after the holidays, I hope you had a lovely Christmas if you celebrate, holiday break if you don't, and yeah, hopefully good things to come in the new year, and Happy New Year to all of you, because this will be the last thing I post in 2024. Bye!